Well, it's my time of year. I should work on a video, it's been way too long. So it's been about 3 weeks and I barely got anything done, so I'll start working on something. I think I could do something small in 9 days. Bring it on. Howdy! Welcome to HollowPatch. I'm Z, your local pumpkin-headed artist, writer, and part-time necromancer. So I know the last time I was seen was in July. About that. I didn't disappear. There's been another 20-minute video in the works since August that's been practically finished this entire time, but it's kind of been on hold for exactly one thing, so I don't know when that'll ever get finished, but I hope it does eventually. Also, school started for me. Despite what that recording in the unreleased video says, school has very much been going on, and while I've been trying to kickbox it, it's definitely winning. I have no idea when this video is going to be released, whether it be in October or November. Between homework, art, writing, and trying to push that video out like a constipated grandparent, I could only really bring myself to make a small video. So, what's that small video about? Well, it was originally going to be some good old US urban legends, but one of these I went down with such a rabbit hole with that it would have taken over a large portion of that video even if I glossed over a lot of it, and then made a crazy long video. So I scrapped it and decided to just make a video about only it. What could it possibly be? The Legend of the Candy Lady, aka Clara Crane. The seemingly quick, easy, and obscure legend from Terrell, Texas sent me on such a ridiculous goose chase that I honestly don't know what to even make of it as I record this. Not just the legend itself, but the equally as bizarre nature of its documentation online. You wouldn't believe me if I told you that the story ended up having NFTs and Tumblr involved, of all the things to do with a story from a tiny town. So, join me, as I walk through the legend itself, its documentation, and my time trying to make sense of it all, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. I promise I'm trying to get back on track with videos and enjoy talking about these topics, even if I don't particularly believe in them. With all of that out of the way, let's start with... As stated before, this was originally going to be part of a larger video, the first legends I showcased, in fact, thinking it would be easy to research. Oh, what a fool I was. But when I started my research and taking notes, something immediately struck me as odd when I very quickly discovered that my only sources consisted of vague articles of dubious quality, WordPress blogs, and miscellaneous social media posts. And at that moment, I realized that if I wanted something good quality, I was going to have to hyper-analyze everything. So to start, I'll give a basic rundown of the legend, because from the few sources online, there's a couple disputed details. The legend of the Candy Lady originates from Terrell, Texas, a small town somewhere around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Like many urban legends, it's allegedly rooted in a thin thread of truth. This tiny little nugget is the identity of the Candy Lady, thought to be a woman named Clara Crane. Clara was born sometime in the very late 19th century, marrying a farmer and having exactly one daughter. This daughter later died from an accident under her husband's watch, and Clara, enraged, allegedly sought revenge on her husband by feeding him poisoned caramels. I will remind you, we're not on to the legend part yet. Either way, Clara was arrested for causing the death of her husband the next day, then later declared insane, and then placed in the North Texas Lunatic Asylum, which has been renamed to Terrell State Hospital, though I imagine the quality of care to be the same. Clara stayed here for a few years, later released due to overcrowding, where any official record of her begins to fade away. This is where the legend of the Candy Lady begins, as not even 5 years later, kids in Terrell begin to disappear. While it's not known at first, children in Terrell were apparently receiving candies left on their windowsills, later accompanied by notes asking them to come out and play. For some reason, kids not only ate these candies, but kept quiet about it until after several kids had already gone missing. When they finally told the adults this secret, a farmer found candy wrappers filled with children's teeth around the same time, prompting either a police officer or a sheriff to investigate. Presumably soon after this, the sheriff himself disappears and is later found dead in a ditch, fork stabbed into his eyes and candy jammed into his pockets. The sheriff was apparently the last victim of the Candy Lady, but it's worth mentioning that the legend never brings up if they found the missing children in a similar state or found them ever. There's a lot to be unpacked here, a lot of potential questions, like why those kids didn't say anything or we even willingly ate random candies left intentionally on their window, but I tried to ignore that part and instead focus on the seeming seed of truth. Which led me down a 2.5 hour long rabbit hole of trying to find records. To cut to the chase, I could not find any. As far as I'm aware, any records before 1900 are most likely not online, but also probably kept more closely and locally. Especially given that Terrell is a former sundown town that began construction in 1873 and then incorporated in 1875. Those dates are important for later because now led me to believe that it would be impossible to find anything like birth records for Clara Crane in general. Either way, I could not find any birth, death, or marriage records for Clara or her husband. I also could not find any records on Marcella Crane or Terrell State Hospital, but I'm not surprised that I couldn't either. It's 100% possible that I missed something, especially thinking about it as I record this, but I'll be honest, the best way to find any records is probably looking locally or in Dallas itself. However, I don't have the time to drive 4.5 hours to the Dallas-Fort Worth area for records of an urban legend, which I probably don't have the right to have in the first place. So for that little string of truth, I'll have to call it there. And that left me with 4 articles, a Facebook post, a Tumblr blog, and 3 WordPress blogs. It was time to look very closely and dig very, very deeply. Yeah, so this video is mostly about the bizarre documentation around the urban legend, rather than the legend itself. There's a lot of questions that could be asked about it with few answers, and after a certain point raising so many questions about an urban legend becomes redundant, especially one that you could probably only get the meat and potatoes of if you lived in Terrell yourself. What's worth asking about, however, is the rabbit hole I went down trying to research the Candy Lady, starting with a few typo-ridden, bare-bones articles. There are about 5 articles online for the Candy Lady, one of which is locked to people without accounts, so I only really looked at 4. 2 from a site called Only in Your State, another from a website called Vocal, and another called Farmer Coop. They tell about the same story as to what I just recapped, but with minor differences, and this is where I started keeping track of dates, because it will be important later. Both from Only in Your State don't have much to them, the first of which was from April 2018 and the second from January 2022. The former is the only one of my sources to mention the Candy Lady being some kind of vampiric figure, taking children after feeding them candy. The letter has basically no differences aside from bringing up Clara's neighbor finding her the day after killing her husband, noting a shaken and frenzied state. That's kind of all there is to them. It's something I can read in under a minute, laden with stock images, go figure. What was even more bare bones was the Vocal article, which had several typos and was clearly not proofread, probably not even being a page long. It's from sometime in 2022, and while I don't consider it credible at all, it does have a few standout details. The first of these oddities are the dates, as most of my research is people agreeing that Clara was born in 1871, convicted in 1895, and then released in 1899. These dates can very well have doubts shed upon them, for example, Clara being born in 1871 but Terrell only beginning construction in 1873. Or it's entirely possible that she just lived in a very rural area, but still, this article states she was born in 1891, a full 20 years off. Another is stating that 8 children disappeared over the course of 1 year, whereas the others seem to imply this was over the course of a few years instead. The final detail is saying that the sheriff was found by a riverbank with no forks in his eyes but candy in his pockets. Again, not a lot to unpack given how vague it is. You can't really expect to come across anything credible when it comes to urban legends, much as obscure ones, but I still doubt this one nonetheless. The last of these from Farmer Coop has the exact same dates issue, placing everything a decade after the mostly agreed on dates instead. It actually says Clara was sentenced to Terrell State Hospital for 4 years instead of being released early. Curiously enough, it's also the only one of my sources to name the farmer who found the teeth, that name being Jeb Smith. It also doesn't mention forks in the eyes. Is it credible? I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't know what's credible and what isn't anymore. That's about the top of the iceberg covered, so now we can move on to the blogs, and the beginning of the insanity I had to sort through. There are about 3 WordPress blogs that have something on Clara Crane, dated July 2017, January 2022, and September to October of 2015 respectively. There's also a Facebook post from April 2017, but we'll put a pin in that and come back to it. The youngest of these says that they heard the story from locals after visiting Terrell, which is a good sign if true, but it's hard to tell at this point because of how deep the blog rabbit hole goes. Something you'll see that lines up with the other blogs is the stated years, which match up like how I said earlier across all 3. Another similarity is stating that around 7 to 8 children disappeared from 1903 to 1913, and these blogs finally give Clara's husband a name, that being Leonard Gilbert Crane, who I couldn't find anything on either. Finally, these 3 blogs seem to agree that Marcella died in some kind of farming accident while under Leonard's watch. This is also where these 2 images start popping up, and this is important for later. The blog from July of 2017 seems to be from a sci-fi author covering conspiracy theories, who's about as skeptical as I am about the legend, questioning whether or not Clara Crane was ever a real person, but unable to tell because they don't live in the area. Curiously, it states Marcella's death would be during 1893, and instead of a dead sheriff being found, it's a young boy's body whose eyes were gouged out with a fork. It's the only one that mentions this, and I'm curious to know where the author heard it, especially given those same 2 images that show up again. The last blog, or I think it's a blog, I can't tell, is from 2015, having a few replies from September to October by someone named Psych Madness, who claims to live locally, at least at the time, and asked their grandmother about the Candy Lady. Of course, I cannot verify this, and they specify another string of disappearances their grandma claims to be the Candy Lady's work to be around the 1940s, but still tells the same tale with the same time frame. In terms of differences and similarities, the original poster mentions a brother and sister going missing first, where more kids disappear over a number of years before the adults find out about the candy they were being left. The farmer goes unnamed, but still finds rotten teeth, and a police officer instead of a sheriff is found dead. This blog wouldn't be too big of a find, that is, until you realize the OP attaches those same 2 images again, and then a link to a Tumblr blog, which leads to a dead food picture blog. Yeah, that was disappointing because that's where they claimed to get the images, but I wasn't exactly surprised. Tumblr is a very broken website for anyone who doesn't know, and it's very easy for old blogs to get taken over by new ones, get deactivated and have someone else claim the URL, or just get plain weird for no reason. So I ended up gambling with Tumblr's equally as broken search function, and... there was another one. It was dead, but as far as I can tell, it's the earliest mention of Clara Crane online, and the source of these two images along with something else. Something that comes up less than the newspaper clipping and this alleged photo of Clara is a letter she apparently wrote to her sister named Aggie, which I'll read here. Dearest Aggie, I am elated. I have been informed by Dr. Matthews that Marcy and I will be returning home in less than 3 weeks. As you can imagine, Marcy can barely contain her excitement. Every night she asks, "Is tomorrow the day we go home, Mother?" Very soon I will be able to tell her, yes. Our stay here has been somewhat of a trial, though I have been grateful to the good doctor and his staff and their dedication to our treatment and recovery. Leonard's death has put us in such a severe state of melancholy that I fear we would never escape it. These past 2 years have been more difficult than any in my life, and my dear Marcella, after all that she has had to endure, has become my strength, my flame of hope. I must be honest with you, sister. Upon our arrival here, I carried a hatred in my heart for Justice Saunders and Councillor McCarty, but I have come to realize that perhaps they were men through whom the Lord's hand had been at work, in placing us where we could grow beyond this tragedy. Though I did not know it at the time, those days being dark in my memory. Even as my pen writes these words, I can almost smell the cedars in my yard waiting for us to return, and Basil no doubt wagging his tail and jumping upon us when we enter the house. Though I would be lying if I were to say that I have no trepidation about once again living in our house without Leonard. It will feel strange for us without his presence, but I cannot think about that at this point. Marcella needs me to be strong now, as Leonard, in life, was strong for us both. And now with the strength of our friends and our prayers, I hope we can return home and begin to rebuild after our tribulation. I expect to be busy in the coming weeks preparing for our departure from here, so if you do not receive any writing, know that I will write you as soon as we get back home. Thank you for the undying support and strength that you have been so generous with since our arrival. Love always, your sister, Clara. Oh yeah, something I forgot to mention is that Clara allegedly made a doll of her daughter out of torn bedsheets, which she apparently spoke to at night. That's what this letter means by Marcy. Up until this point, I had no idea why any mention of it only had a transcript, along with never being sourced or having a photo of this letter. As it turns out, this was why. Anytime these images or this letter popped up, it was never sourced, because where it came from, this Tumblr blog didn't source it either. The post of the clipping is just the picture and a caption, the apparent photo of Clara is in a post about the Legends timeline events, and the letter, it's just a text post. In fact, remember that Facebook post I mentioned earlier? It's from 2017, and it basically copies the timeline post, with minor wording changes to make it look more professional. I had been wondering why a ghost tour place from Houston would have this knowledge that apparently no one else does, and this was why. It also answered the question of why this legend was mentioned on Wikipedia but didn't have a page itself, because the bulk of the sources around Clara Crane can be traced back to a random Tumblr blog. The Tumblr blog itself has been dead since 2017, having made exactly one post that year. There's nothing to discern about the author of this blog. I assume it's a side blog, but it's impossible to tell. It's impossible to verify the legitimacy of the clipping, the photo, or the letter. You know, the unreleased video had me going up Tumblr's rectum for information, and I thought this video would be a nice break from that, but apparently no. Z has to be dragged back to Tumblr hell by the ankles. But if you would check the runtime of this video, you'll notice there's still a big chunk to go, and that's because I had another lead going on in the background. One that wasn't as much of a revelation as much as it was a circus. One of the first results of Clara Crane is actually this website, presenting a bizarre version of the candy lady that makes absolutely no sense, and oh boy, it's certainly something. Sometimes upon visiting the website, a pop-up urging you to enable notifications comes up, an undeniably safe and trustworthy sign. Usually closing and reopening the tab allowed me to see it normally, but I don't know if that's intentional or not. After getting past this, you're met with this strange page with a blurb on Clara Crane along with this ridiculous body victim count at a given age. According to the site, at least the site's version of the Candy Lady, she's got 36 bodies under her belt and is apparently 151 years old. We're met with the same supposed picture of Clara from before, accompanied by a strangely written bio that honestly leaves even more questions than answers. Serial killer Clara Crane, who goes by the internet alias Candy Lady, was born in Terrell, Texas, 1871, where she lived a simple farm life before being driven to madness by the accidental death of her only daughter, Marcella. The tragic loss of her child was blamed on her late husband, Leonard Gilbert Crane, a known alcoholic, and after years of a growing psychosis, Clara secretly fed Leonard poisoned caramel pieces in retaliation. The murder was soon reported to the local Sheriff Dixon, and after a short trial, Clara was deemed insane and committed to Terrell State Mental Hospital, where she was subsequently raped and abused for years under warden Dr. Vernon Matthews and his staff. In 1903, Clara was released back to her home due to overcrowding, and within weeks she vanished from sight. Soon after, the townsfolk began finding caramels left on their windowsills at night with messages inside telling them to come and play. Kids started to go missing, the children of the very people who tormented her during her stay in the lunatic asylum, leading Sheriff Dixon to conclude that Clara must be responsible for the abductions. A search party was formed, driven deep into Clara's cornfields by the bloodthirst of a witch hunt. Sheriff Dixon was found days later with forks stabbed into his eyes, and the only evidence gathered of the missing children were their small, bloody teeth nestled inside paper caramel wrappers. So, that's a lot. Clearly something's up. With the context I have now, I think I understand why this bio says internet lies, but at the time it absolutely baffled me. I can't tell if it was trying to make her out as a sympathetic villain or some kind of victim, but it was clearly written to be dramatic, even if it set off alarms in my head. It's also interesting to note that the farmer is never mentioned, and that there's not only a named sheriff, but a named asylum staff member along with a few other minute details. Putting that aside, I decided to give the rest of the site a gander, immediately realizing this was some kind of movie project, hence most of the strange details. My initial thought was, oh, neat, that's kinda cool, and the next was, but why Internet Elias? Something known about the homepage is that it seems to break fairly often. The logo of this thing doesn't always show, and it's very bare bones otherwise. This, coupled with the occasionally breaking enabling notifications pop-up and the poor design of the website overall, leads me to believe that whoever made this either wasn't trying or doesn't know how to build websites very well. But I did notice that they had an Instagram, and out of curiosity, I decided to give that a look. It seemed relatively normal for a low-budget production at first, and I skimmed through a few of their oldest posts back from 22, and they're somewhat active in 2024. I didn't touch the pin post yet, because I felt if anything fishy was going on, it probably wouldn't be in the pin post, right? As it turns out, the exact opposite was true. I'll just bring up the oddly popular post and let you guess what's off about it. If you guessed NFTs, you are completely correct, obviously. This is probably why this post was so popular compared to the normal post, aside from being pinned. Because this wasn't some tiny passion project, this was a crypto thing. Aside from my enthusiasm for a movie based on an obscure legend being killed faster than Bambi's mom, it explained the Internet Elias part of the About section. There were many things I didn't expect to come out of this today. Tumblr blogs and NFTs are definitely two of those things. There's one more thing about this ridiculous conclusion to a deceivingly simple legend. Back in NFT movie Clara's description, the newspaper clipping and the letters show up again, but the clipping was cited. We've already established that both of these most likely originate from an unsighted Tumblr blog, but I didn't find that out yet at the time, so the clipping having a sighting caught my attention. It was stated to be from the Terrell Tribune, which is a real newspaper and seemed to have, in fact, been around during 1895, when Clara Crane was apparently arrested. Unfortunately, any older archives of these newspapers seem to be stored in local libraries with no ways to access them online. With the context of the photo's origins, unless the people behind this company somehow knew the author of the Tumblr blog, it's impossible to verify how true the citation is, and it's probably false or some kind of guess by the site makers to make the legend more dramatic. I'm extremely curious to know if the Terrell Tribune is aware of their name being tied to a dubious NFT project based on pretty much nothing, and why one would tie a real newsletter to this type of thing. Overall, it's a ridiculous conclusion to the circus that was researching this legend, and it's kind of upsetting to know that Clara Crane, if she was ever a real person's history, will probably be marred by an NFT project, especially when there's a lot to explore about the legend that its current internet documentation can't provide. And also is a pain in the ass to research. My brain hurts too much now to go further, so cheerio, cut to outro. I'm done. Back it up. Goodbye. Hello, thanks for watching all the way through. Please subscribe if you want more. I'm sorry for the long silence and the super late Halloween special. School's been taking up a lot of my time and leaving me with no time for videos. I hope to at least get the other video out soon, but I can't say anything about consistent future ones. Juggling regular art, writing, school, a comic, and then these videos is difficult and draining. Especially when the only one working on all of those things. Especially when all those things are notoriously time-consuming in of themselves. Again, thank you for sticking around, and I'll see y'all sometime? I don't know, but if you want to see art which I can do more consistently, then you can check out my Tumblr art blog at the Mirage Forest or my CARA account, the necromancer. Thank you again, bye!